You step off the trail. 20 steps in, the sound changes. The birds you could hear from the parking lot are gone. The light drops by half, and the ground under your feet stops being dirt and starts being something soft and layered and deep. You think you're standing in a forest. You're standing at the top of one. Because a forest isn't a place. It's a stack. 4 layers, each one darker than the last. And almost everything alive in it is in a layer you have never once looked at. The layer you walk through is the emptiest one. So what's in the other 3? Let's start at the top, because that's the part nobody bothered to check for the first 200 years of forest science. In 1982, an entomologist named Erwin did something that sounds like vandalism. He picked one tree species in Panama, Luehea seemannii, and fogged it with insecticide. Then he stretched sheets underneath and collected everything that fell out. From that single kind of tree, he counted around 1/200 species of beetle. Not 1/200 beetles, 1/200 kinds. So he extrapolated. If one tree species holds that many, and the tropics hold that many tree species, then the number of arthropod species on Earth wasn't the 1.5 million everybody had assumed. It was closer to 30 million. And he was probably wrong. Later work pulled that estimate back down to somewhere between 3 and 7 million, and biologists still argue about it today. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is that the argument is about tens of millions of species. And it only started because one man finally looked up. Because the canopy is where most of the forest actually lives. And it isn't only animals up there. In 1981, an ecologist named Nalini Nadkarni climbed into the canopy of a Costa Rican rainforest on mountaineering ropes and found soil. Not dirt blown up from below. Real soil, meters above the ground, built out of decades of dead moss and leaves caught in the branches. Then, she found roots in it. She traced them, and they weren't coming up from the ground. The tree was growing roots out of its own branches, down into the dirt, collecting on itself and drinking from it. A tree, feeding on its own compost, in the air. Below that is the understory. And the defining fact of the understory is theft. By the time light gets through the canopy, as little as 2% of it reaches the forest floor. Everything living down here is competing for a resource that has already been taken. So the plants cheat. Leaves grow wider and thinner than they should, because they will never need to survive full sun. Some grow toward darkness instead of light, feeling for the trunk of a tree, and only then starting to climb. And some gave up on photosynthesis completely. Ghost plants with no green in them anywhere, plugged into fungus, living on sugar that some other tree made. You have walked past those. They look like something growing in a hospital. The floors where the forest stops making things and starts taking them apart. Every leaf that fell this year is here. Almost none of last year's is. The difference is that the forest ate it. A fallen tree isn't debris, it's infrastructure. It's called a nurse log. It can take centuries to disappear, and it feeds seedlings that root directly down into the corpse of the thing they're replacing. And some of it glows. Certain fungi and rotting wood give off a faint green light. Foxfire. Sailors and soldiers reported it for centuries, and were told they'd imagined it. They hadn't. It's a real chemical reaction in a real organism, and nobody is completely certain what it's for. And then the last layer, the one you can't see at all. Under the floor, the soil is threaded with fungus, not scattered through it, woven into it. A network of filaments, finer than hair, wrapped around the roots of nearly every tree in the forest. In 1997, an ecologist named Suzanne Simard took paper birch and Douglas fir seedlings in British Columbia, sealed them inside bags, and fed each species a different labeled version of carbon dioxide. 9 days later, she dug them up to see what was inside them. The carbon had moved. Carbon that went into the birch came out inside the fir, through the fungus, underground, between 2 completely different species of tree. Now, you have probably heard where this goes. Mother trees deliberately feeding their children. The forest as one wise, connected organism. Be careful with that one. The carbon transfer is real and measured. The story that grew on top of it, that trees are choosing to do it, has never actually been demonstrated. The scientists who work on this are the loudest people saying so. What we can say is stranger and harder to hold on to. The individual tree may not be the right unit. In the Malheur National Forest in Oregon, there's a single armillaria fungus covering 385 acres. nearly 4 square miles. It has been growing there for at least 2,400 years. It's the largest living thing anyone has ever found. It is almost entirely underground. And if you stood in the middle of it, you would see nothing but trees. So here's the actual shape of it. The layer with the most life in it is the one over your head. The layer doing the most work is the one under your feet. And the layer you're standing in, the one you call the forest, is mostly just a corridor between the two. You are never walking through a forest. You are walking through the narrow strip of one that happens to sit at eye level, at the exact scale of a human body, on the one day you were there. It goes up further than you looked, and down further than you can dig. It was doing all of this before anyone existed to name it, and it will carry on doing it after. You didn't see a forest. You saw the part of it that was your size.